Story 1. I accidentally called a student a rude name while I was student teaching. His name was Mitch. He was complaining about something, and my mind said, "Mitch, stop complaining." But my mouth mistakenly said, "Bitch, stop whining." The classroom erupted in laughter, and I apologized profusely. He was okay with it, as it was obviously a slip of the tongue, but I can say I called a student a rude name now. Story 2. I had a customer come in one night venting about the people at his job. He expressed his frustration, saying he wanted to quit because everyone treated him poorly. Like the classic Reddit post, I had two replies run through my head. Half of me wanted to say I understood his desire to quit, while the other half wanted to say forget them. What came out was, I don't blame them. The poor guy looked at me like I was a monster. Story 3. I called someone a fool. Turns out that is prison slang here for a child molester. He became very serious and said, "Don't ever call me that again." Story 4. I intended to say something harmless in Cantonese, but accidentally used their version of a racial slur. I'm glad only my wife heard me. Story 5. A coworker who has always been overweight told me she was pregnant. I said, "I didn't know you were pregnant." Then she informed me she was 8 months along. You can't win in this situation. Story 6. When I was a naive child in 8th grade, a classmate told me to go back to my home state, as I had a difficult family situation. The first and only thing I could think to say was, "Well, why don't you go back to Africa?" This is one of the rare instances where I wish I could confront my younger self. Story 7. I was about 6 years old when I saw some people pushing their car, which had obviously broken down, in the parking lot. I liked the car, so I yelled out the window, "Nice car!" They reacted angrily. Story 8. I had a significant word mix-up while teaching piano several years ago. A young student asked about the black keys, and I tried to explain that you can have B flat or a sharp, which are the same key on the piano. She wasn't understanding, and what I meant to say was, "These are confusing. That's why we don't teach the black keys to young children." However, what I actually said was, "These are confusing. That's why we don't teach the little keys to black children." She found it hilarious that I got mixed up, but I sincerely hope she never repeated that to anyone. Story 9. I really liked a guy I went on 2 dates with who happened to be Jewish. I suggested a date at a restaurant I really liked in a city called Kew Gardens, and my phone autocorrected it to Jew Gardens. Story 10. I asked a woman I knew, "Have you still not had that baby yet?" while pointing at her stomach. She replied, "Yes, 3 weeks ago." Story 11. I met a black student from Harvard and asked him if he was there on a basketball scholarship. 20 years later, I'm still angry at myself for thinking and saying that. I still can't forgive myself, but I am trying. I'm so sorry, and I know you're doing amazing out there. Story 12. I was in drama class, and we were doing a murder mystery project. One girl who was never really nice to me was dressed in the stereotypical outfit from old Hollywood movies, a short red dress and a fur coat. I had been trying to get on her good side, so I said, "I'm surprised you don't dress like this more often. The style really suits you." It didn't occur to me how easily that could be interpreted in the wrong way until later when her friend came up to me and asked why I had called her a whore. Story 13. Hitler was very successful in his endeavors until the end of the war. Story 14. I was explaining something about my bag to the TSA agent. I said, "When you reach a certain age," referring to myself, but he was at least a decade older than me and did not find it amusing. Story 15. I was at the beach watching my grandchildren play in a puddle with several other kids. One of the mothers came over and asked which ones were mine. I pointed them out. She was very fit, wearing a nice bikini and a modern robotic prosthetic leg. It actually looked pretty cool. She admired my turquoise ring and asked where I got it. "I made it," I said. "I create jewelry." She nodded and said, "I prefer gold jewelry, but you know," and shrugged. I replied, "Yeah, it costs a lot." Story 16. At a traffic sign, an older man approached from the opposite side and began to insult me. I responded by telling him something inappropriate, though I don't know why I reacted that way. I just remember he had a confused look afterward. I still regret it. Story 17. I was about 14 years old, talking with an online friend on Xbox whom I met on RuneScape. He was a few years older than me, and I knew his family wasn't wealthy. He lived in a trailer park but owned a Nissan 350Z. He sent me a picture of it outside his house, and I said, "It's like a Lamborghini next to a trash can." Immediately after I said that, I felt a heaviness in my chest and started apologizing. Story 18. Teen youth group board game night, playing Pictionary. I was the youngest at 12 years old, and adults were supervising. The drawing looked to me like a hair dryer. So amid many other guesses, I shouted, completely innocently, "Blow job!" And that was the day I learned the difference between a blow dry and a blow job. Story 19. I told a woman who was about to lift something, "Ma'am, let me get that. You are expecting." To which she replied, "I am not expecting." Story 20. I called a morbidly obese friend Fatso. There was another guy we referred to as Fatso who was not fat at all. My brain just made a mistake that one time. He was really angry and actually hit the gym the following month and got fit. Story 21. When I was 8 and didn't know that the N-word was derogatory, I used it. We were visiting my dad's cousins on the other side of the state whom I had never met before. We were watching a basketball game on television. The only context I had ever heard that word in was black people calling other black people that in movies. I thought it was just another word that meant black or African American. So when a black player jumped and dunked the ball, I exclaimed, "Wow, that player can jump." And everyone just looked at me. My dad told me that wasn't a word I should say, and he would explain it to me later. I was pretty mortified. Story 22. I accidentally used a derogatory term at a bar once and was asked to leave. I was somewhat intoxicated and didn't mean it offensively. When I was younger, we used to say that and gay in non-offensive ways. But times have changed. I was quite embarrassed and felt bad. Story 23. I called a woman named Karen sir when she was having a meltdown, which resulted in her trying to flash everyone and asking, "Do these look like they belong to a sir?" The guy on the contact with me couldn't help but add, "There is nothing there to look at." This is another guest complaint. Story 24. I remember as a child when I jokingly said that cows came from hell in front of my Indian friend. We were just kids, but I recall my mom was horrified. Story 25. This is my sweet mother, not me. We were at a very busy wine tasting event. At the tables for popular wineries, you had to stand in line for quite a while before getting to the tasting. My mom doesn't drink red wine. It gives her serious headaches. I usually don't either for the same reason. But even if you were only going to try half of the wines offered, you wait the same amount of time as someone tasting all of them. My mother, tired of so much waiting for so little reward, very loudly proclaimed, "I just wish there was a whites-only line." Story 26. I was in the marching band in school. For context, my band director is a black man, and the head of the music department is an older white woman. The director works under the department head. After practice, I was talking to some friends, and one of them mentioned how mean the department head was, comparing her to the Wicked Witch of the West. Thinking I had come up with a clever joke about the Wizard of Oz, I said, "Oh, does that make our band director one of the flying monkeys?" Story 27. I said, "Jigger" in Liverpool. It's an old common name for an alleyway or ginnel. I was surprised to be informed by a colleague from just outside the Liverpool area that I shouldn't use that term in a meeting. I had to explain, but I still think he believed I was being derogatory. Story 28. When I was about 8 years old, I remember playing a game on MySpace and trading items with another player. You could type messages and they would appear in a speech bubble above your head. The strange thing was, for some reason, you couldn't see what you were typing. After our trade, I was typing a question but realized my mistake midway and deleted it to type, "Thanks." It turns out I didn't hit delete enough times, and what appeared was "Thanks ho." I had never felt so bad in my entire 8 years of life. Story 29. When a coworker asked if I wanted to donate to cancer research, I blurted out something like, You know they have a cure for cancer. The words bypassed my brain and came straight out of my mouth. I felt awful, but I felt even worse when I found out her father was sick with cancer at the time. Story 30. I once told a student in my class, "If Stephen jumped off a bridge, would you?" This was 3 days after a student in that year level had indeed jumped off a bridge and taken his own life. It's strange because that phrase is not something I would normally use, but perhaps the whole jumping off a bridge situation was on my mind, and it slipped out. Story 31. My dad grew up in Massachusetts, where liquor and beer stores are commonly called package stores. He said that growing up, they would call them packies for short. Years later, I moved to Massachusetts for graduate school and casually mentioned this in a conversation with some friends. They were horrified, assuming that the true slang was actually packis, as many package stores are owned by immigrants. I really don't know if the term is innocent or racist, but that was enough to stop me from ever saying it again. Story 32. I was a little drunk at a work event and talking to a woman from a different department. She said, "Well, you know what they say. Getting married adds 20 pounds to you." To which I replied without thinking, "Oh yeah? How many times have you been married?" Story 33. A girl I was interested in had a boyfriend who had committed suicide a couple of months before I met her. During a brief conversation with her and a mutual friend, we greeted one another, and they asked how I was doing. I wasn't feeling well, so I replied, "I'm terrible. I kind of want to kill myself." Story 34. I once accidentally denounced slavery in a conversation about how the Irish were treated when they first immigrated to the New World. Story 35. I was discussing laundry and meant to mention separating white clothing from dark-colored clothing. What I said was, "I need to keep the whites and the colors separated." Story 36. I accidentally called my boss overweight. I was selling old steel-bone corsets and mentioned she would look great in them if she were interested in buying. Without thinking, I started talking about how I had just lost a significant amount of weight, so the corsets no longer fit me. I was focused on their excellent condition and didn't realize the implications of my words, as weight was not on my mind. I never thought of her as overweight, but I know it was a sensitive topic for her. Story 37. A work colleague told me how she was going home for the holidays and how her mom always encourages her to eat. When she returned, I saw her and said, "Hey, you've put on weight." I realized what I had just blurted and tried to say, "Your mom really fed you well?" But it only made things worse. Story 38. Someone's name in Valorant contained a derogatory term against Latinos. I read it out loud to my friends, not realizing it was a slur. They were shocked and explained its meaning to me, and I felt embarrassed. I'm not sure if they fully believed that I didn't know what it meant, but honestly, I didn't. Story 39. It was in high school. A larger girl was arguing with a bully. Fed up, she said, "Act like you can't see me." As I passed by, I replied, "It's kind of hard not to see you." She then sprinted and strangled me in a Homer Simpson style. Story 40. I had an older lady as a customer, and we engaged in general conversation. She was complaining about getting old. I had a slip of the tongue and said, "Yeah, well, enjoy the rest of your days," in a monotone voice. All I intended to say was "enjoy the rest of your day," but it came out sounding like a threat. Story 41. I just saw a concert of an artist I adore in Paris. I meant to tell her how great it was, but my French brain went to the idiom "était terrible," which, in some contexts, means it was really great. My mouth said, "It was terrible." I will always remember her expression changing from "such a cute fan" to "what the hell." It's been years, and I still remember the shame I felt when I realized what I had said a few minutes later. LP Jobai, if you can ever forgive me. Story 42. Had a drunk patient in the ambulance. All he asked about was how long it was going to take because he needed stitches. He went on and on about how he doesn't have time and needed to know when he would be done so he could catch the train home. I asked him where he lived, and he said he lived in a village about 2 hours from where we were. I thought to myself that I wouldn't want to go home if I lived in that village. However, I said it out loud, and he looked shocked and offended but didn't comment on it. We didn't say much to each other for the rest of the ride. Story 43. You need to keep your whites separate from your colored items. I was referring to a recent laundry incident while I was in Tottenham, North London. Some of the locals didn't seem particularly pleased. Story 44. I lived in Japan for many years. The word for fruit, kodomono, sounds a bit like the word for children, kodomo. So when I accidentally said I wanted to eat kodomo, I was surprised by the looks of horror I received. Story 45. My grandmother passed away when I was 8. Before her passing, she would give all the grandchildren $50 in a card each year for Christmas. In a moment when my father was clearly grieving during the week she died, I thought I was being empathetic and comforting by mentioning something I would miss. I said, I guess I won't be getting my $50 for Christmas anymore. My mother shot me a disapproving look, and my father left the room. I think about it now and cringe. Story 46. I am great friends with one of my coworkers. He is from the Dutch Antilles, so he has a light brown skin color. On a Friday afternoon, while the mood was a bit weekend-like, I was very much occupied with a task on the computer. He walked into my office and said to me in a casual manner, "Hey Mitch." I responded automatically with, "Yo, what's up?" The moment those words left my mouth, I froze like a deer in headlights. "Oh no, I'm sorry, man." He just laughed and said, "Don't worry, bro, we're all good, man." I was scared for a second there. Story 47. Interestingly, I called a Colombian guy I was dating Cabra, because he's a Capricorn. I meant it as a term of affection, but he heard cabron, which means asshole. Ironically, we ended things a month later because I wouldn't send him 500. So I guess he understood what he really was. Story 48. Once in art class at school, I was highly autistic and did and said inappropriate things during my high school days. We had art, and my teacher was a substitute. She was Irish, so I sat there and repeated what she said, adding with that accent at the end of it. I didn't realize that what I said was offensive, and I regret it. I was pulled by my ear and sent to the referral room. However, I have learned my lesson. Story 49. I was walking around a high school football game with some friends when I was in middle school. The path between the bleachers and the concession stand wasn't particularly well lit, and it was dark. A little further ahead, I saw someone in a dark hoodie on a mobile phone. Without thinking, I said, "Hey, floating mobile phone," because I saw the light from the screen but couldn't clearly see the person holding it. The person turned out to be a black kid, and he was upset. I apologized, but he didn't believe me when I explained that I couldn't tell who it was from the distance I was standing. Story 50. I told my first crush that I hadn't noticed she was at school that day since we were in the same class when I met her in the afternoon. I didn't care at that point, but that must have been tough for her. Story 51. I was at a project completion party at a fancy restaurant funded by the company. I became quite inebriated on expensive alcohol to the point where I didn't feel the familiar buzz of cheap drinks, so I wasn't aware of my intoxication. Typically, I would feel the buzz in my head. During the gathering, I jokingly told a room full of people of Asian descent that they all had small genitalia, as I mistakenly thought I heard them discussing it. We had previously visited hot springs together. Years later, I learned that I actually have an exceptionally large one. My intention here is to explain why I made that comment and to note that they were probably of average size. I laughed at the situation because the inebriated version of myself found the differences to be cute and funny, considering it harmless. The room fell silent. Someone pointed out that I was drunk, and the topic was quickly changed, allowing the conversation to resume. A friend expressed sympathy for me, which I didn't understand at the time. Now I do, and I no longer drink in that manner. Story 52. Mine was in reaction to a story told by an older Japanese scientist, a kind gentleman, when I was a student. He recounted an incident involving an American visitor who was offended by a mistranslation on a menu, to the point that she left the restaurant. We were curious and asked what it had said. He absolutely did not want to tell us, but we insisted. When he finally told me, I was so shocked that I gasped and covered my mouth with my hands. Before that moment, if you had asked me whether any phrase or expression could shock me that much, I would have said no. I felt terrible because this kind gentleman looked worried that I would leave as well. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.